Finding Home. An original story by Eloquence. Part 1. Texas Red Clay. Chapter 1. Adjacent. The land smelled like possibility. Queena Berkeley stood at the edge of what would become hers. 12 acres of central Texas hill country, cedar and limestone. A creek cutting through the back third of the property that her realtor had called a feature, and that Queena had privately called a sign. She had driven 4 hours from Houston in the early morning dark, the city dissolving behind her in the rearview mirror like something she had been trying to leave for years. The night sky opening wide as she moved west and north until the horizon went from orange glow to true black. She had stopped once for gas and coffee at a roadside station outside Bastrop, standing in the cool dark with steam rising from her cup, and she had felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, like she was moving towards something rather than through it. She arrived as the sun cracked the horizon pink and orange, the kind of light that made the limestone glow like something heated from inside, and she had stood right here, at this fence post, for 20 minutes without moving. The land rolled gently away from her, cedar and live oak and the distant silver glint of water where the creek bent through the lower third of the property. A hawk turned slow circles overhead, unhurried, the master of a thermal she couldn't feel. She breathed cedar and dry grass and something older, something geologic, the smell of stone that had been here when nothing else had. 36 years of moving. Hotel rooms with their sealed windows and their particular brand of curated neutrality. No color she had chosen, no art that had meaning, nothing on any surface that was hers except what she'd brought in a carry-on and would take out again in 2 days or 3. Investment properties she had walked through once and never visited again. The logic of the asset consuming the possibility of the place. A condo in Atlanta she had owned for 8 years, had intended to move into, had instead rented to a couple who sent her a Christmas card every year with a photograph of themselves looking happy in rooms she had picked out but never lived in. This one is different. She had promised herself in the car, somewhere around Brenham, the fields going silver on either side of the highway. This one is for you. She was still making that promise to herself, reinforcing it like a beam she kept driving nails into, when she heard the truck. A black pickup, the serious kind, the kind that had been bought to work rather than to signal that the owner could afford to buy something to work, came down the adjacent access road and parked at the boundary line 20 yards north of her. The man who got out was tall. That was the first thing her brain delivered, tall and unhurried, like someone who had decided long ago that the world would wait for him, and had simply been proven right ever since, had adjusted his whole pace accordingly, and stopped feeling the need to apologize for it. He wore dark jeans and a gray Henley pushed to the elbows despite the October cool, and he stood at his fence line the same way she was standing at hers. Looking out, taking inventory, coming home. She watched him and felt the particular awareness of someone being watched, the atmospheric shift of shared attention. He was doing what she was doing, not just assessing the land but arriving in it, settling into it, letting it receive him. She recognized the quality of it because she had been doing the same thing. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, no hand in his pocket, no phone, entirely present with the view in front of him in a way that was increasingly rare in people, and that she noticed the way she noticed craftsmanship, with something that was adjacent to relief. He noticed her about 30 seconds later. She didn't look away. She had stopped doing that sometime around 32, stopped dropping her eyes when a man looked at her, stopped making herself smaller in the small ways women were taught to manage the space they occupied. She held his gaze with the same direct quality she brought to board rooms and negotiation tables, the quality that had once made a commercial lender in Dallas actually lean back in his chair as though recalibrating. He raised a hand. A neighbor's wave, clean and simple, no inflection, no performance of anything. She returned it. They might have left it there, two adults respecting each other's privacy, each their own moment, the fence line as a natural permission to not engage, except that his realtor's car was parked behind his truck, and her realtor's car was parked behind her rental, and the two agents apparently knew each other. Because they were already walking toward the boundary line chatting like old friends at a reunion neither of them had expected to find meaningful, which meant she and the tall man were being pulled into each other's orbit by the gravitational force of small-town Texas real estate. He walked toward the fence line when she did. They arrived at the same moment, as though they had been timing it. Queena Berkeley, she said, extending her hand over the fence. Donte Williams. His grip was firm without being performative, the handshake of a man who understood the difference between demonstrating strength and simply having it. He had a face that had been through something and come out more interesting on the other side, not damaged exactly, just considered, the way certain landscapes are more beautiful for the evidence of weather. Dark eyes that assessed her without apology, with the steady quality of someone who had learned that looking directly at a thing was more respectful than looking around it. Looks like we're going to be neighbors, he said. Looks like. She glanced out at his plot. Good land. Yours too. He looked out at hers and she watched his face do something genuine. Actual appreciation for the lay of the terrain, the gentle topography, the way the early light was hitting the creek corridor in the distance and turning it to hammered copper. He wasn't performing interest. He actually had some. She had learned to tell the difference. That water feature in the back. Year-round creek. Or so I'm told. That's rare out here. That's what sold me. Their realtors were talking permits and surveys behind them, the professional music of transaction. Neither of them turned around. You building? He asked. Custom home. You. He nodded slowly, in the way of someone who has already considered the answer and is now simply confirming it aloud. Same. I've been living in a condo in New York for 6 years, and I've probably spent 14 months of that actually in it. The rest of the time, I'm in airports or conference rooms or whatever hotel the company put me in. A pause. I got tired of paying rent on a storage unit with a view. She laughed before she could decide whether to. It came out genuine. A Rayal laugh. Low and a little surprised. The kind that arrives before you can get your professional management in front of it. I own 3 properties, she said. And I've been living in extended stay hotels for 2 years. He looked at her then with a look that said exactly. The specific look of someone who has finally met a person who understands a particular absurdity about their own life that they have been pretending is normal for so long that hearing it reflected back almost feels like diagnosis. Real estate investor, she offered. Security firm. You. Same concept, different asset class. We're very impressive and also very homeless, he said. She laughed again. Something like that. They exchanged cards because it was the professional thing to do, the social grammar of 2 adults acknowledging that an interaction had been worth continuing. Then Donte Williams took a pen from somewhere, the breast pocket of the Henley, which she noted with a distant, unexamined interest, and wrote something on the back of his card and handed it over the fence. His personal cell, written by hand in a neat, decisive script. In case you want to talk through any of the build logistics, he said, holding her gaze. I've done one custom build before. Happy to share what I learned, which is mostly a list of expensive mistakes. She looked at the number and then up at him, taking a moment to measure the offer, its directness, its practicality, the ease with which it had been extended. That's generous. It's practical. A slight smile appeared. The first one, the one that rearranged things slightly at the corners of his eyes. Also, I'd like to take you for coffee before you drive back to wherever you're driving back to. Direct. No scaffolding around it. No hedging. No would you maybe possibly want to. Just the statement, offered and waiting. She slid the card into the pocket of her jacket, where she could feel the small rectangle of it against her hip. I'm staying through the weekend. Even better. The smile became more certain of itself, more fully committed. Tomorrow morning? 8 o'clock, she said. You pick the place. You're apparently better traveled in Texas than I am. I'll text you the address tonight. His realtor called his name from somewhere behind them. He held her gaze for a moment longer than the situation required. Not a beat too long. Just the precise amount that registered as intention, and then turned and walked back toward his truck with the same unhurried quality he had arrived with. Queena stood at the fence line a moment longer. 12 acres of central Texas hill country, she thought, and apparently a neighbor worth knowing. She turned back to her land and let herself smile at the creek. Chapter 2. 8 o'clock. The coffee shop was on the main square of the nearest small town, a place called Baxter's that had clearly been something else before, a hardware store from the look of the bones, the high ceiling with its industrial grid of wooden joists, the original pressed tin tiles painted white and left to accumulate the particular beautiful imperfection of age. Someone had converted it with good taste and a respect for what had been there, keeping the raw plank floors, the long windows, adding mismatched chairs in shades of terracotta and deep green, the kind of furniture that looked chosen individually and over time. The coffee actually smelled like coffee, which was not something she took for granted anymore. Donte was already there when she arrived at 7:58. He had taken a table by the window, positioned, she noticed, so that she would see him when she came in, not so that he could see the door. He stood up when she entered. Not in an affected way, not a performance of chivalry, just a man who had been raised to acknowledge that a person he was interested in had arrived, who carried that acknowledgement in his body like posture, something structural rather than ornamental. He had ordered black coffee. There was a second cup waiting for her, already at her seat, the steam still rising. She sat down across from him and wrapped her hands around the cup. You guessed right. Black didn't seem like a stretch. Is that a read on my personality? It's a read on your handshake. He leaned back in his chair with a comfortable ease, the kind of stillness that said he had nowhere he would rather be. He was in a dark blue linen shirt today, the collar open, rolled to the forearms the same way the Henley had been yesterday, a man who pushed his sleeves up as a habit, as a statement about being ready to be useful. He wore simple things because he didn't need the additional information. So tell me about the plans. What's Queena Berkeley building in the Texas Hill Country? She liked that he'd used her full name. She liked the way he was sitting, comfortable, unhurried, like he'd cleared the morning for her specifically and genuinely didn't want her to feel the clock, like he had made a decision about the quality of his attention and had given it over without calculation. A house, she said, that I will actually live in. That sounds like it carries some weight. More than I'd probably admit to someone I've known for 24 hours. Then I'm flattered you admitted it at all. She looked at him over her coffee cup. He held the look without blinking or rushing, without dropping his eyes or filling the space with noise. He was comfortable with sustained attention, she noted. Most people weren't. I have a specific vision, she said, and something in her chest unlocked a degree. She had wanted to say this to someone who wasn't a contractor whose investment was professional or a girlfriend who would be enthusiastic in the supportive, general way of people who love you but don't quite understand the specific shape of the thing you want. 4 bedrooms. Open kitchen flowing into a living space with 20-foot ceilings. Big covered porch on the back that runs the full length of the house, facing the creek. She paused. I want to be able to sit on that porch and hear the water. I want the sound of it to be the background of my mornings. You want quiet. I want mine. She shook her head slightly, the beginning of an apology for the bluntness of it. That probably sounds. It sounds exactly right, he said, with the flatness of a man stating a fact. No qualifier needed. She let that settle. Let it be true without immediately managing it. What about you? He considered. He took his time. She liked that too, that he didn't answer before he'd finished thinking, that he treated the question as worth answering properly. Similar instinct, different blueprint. I want something with room. Actual room, not the efficient, maximized, every square foot justified room of a city apartment. Room to walk from one end of it to the other without running out of space in 8 steps. Room to put things down and leave them for a while without them being in someone's way. He took a drink of his coffee. I've been living in 700 square feet with a view that cost me a number I'm embarrassed to say out loud, and every time I'm actually in it I think, this is beautiful, and it is completely wrong for me. What's wrong with it? It's a place to stay. He met her eyes. I want a place to be. She felt something shift in her chest. A small seismic thing, the kind that registers more in the body than the mind, that you feel before you understand it. She kept her face composed. You said you'd done a custom build before, she said. In Oregon. Before the firm scaled, when I still had time to be involved in the decisions rather than just approving them. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I didn't know what I was doing, and I made about 45 expensive decisions I'd take back. The worst one was trusting the contractor to manage the project manager. Those two roles need to be separate, and they need to be adversarial in a productive way. My architect said the same thing. Your architect is smart. She's exceptional. I've worked with her twice on investment builds. This is the first time I've asked her to build something for me. Queena paused, remembering the phone call. She got emotional when I told her. Started the call very professional, very ready to talk square footage and setbacks. And then she heard what I was actually saying, and she went quiet for a moment, and when she came back she was crying. He smiled at that, genuine, wide. The sudden full version that changed his face completely, that made him look younger and less composed and completely real. That's the tell. When people who work with you get more invested than a professional transaction requires, means you've been taking care of everyone else's vision for a long time. She looked at him steadily. That's a lot of reading. Too much. No. She said it simply. It's accurate. He had warm eyes when he smiled. Not the careful warmth of someone who had learned it. The real kind. The involuntary kind. The kind that arrived all at once. Fully. No partial measures or performance. Tell me about the investor life, he said. How long? Since I was 27. Bought my first duplex with money I'd saved working 2 jobs through grad school. Teaching assistant in the mornings, bookkeeping for a restaurant 3 nights a week. The duplex needed work, which I had no idea how to do, but I had YouTube and 2 weeks of vacation time and a terror of failing that is an exceptional teacher. She broke off a piece of the pastry he had also ordered without asking, which she had also noted. Rented both units, lived in my car for 11 months, used the rental income to buy the next thing. You lived in your car. A very sensible Honda Accord, she said, with excellent lumbar support and a gym membership for the shower situation. He laughed, full and real, surprised out of him, a sound that came from below the composed surface she had been reading all morning. She felt a particular satisfaction at having reached through that surface and found something unguarded underneath. Now I own 42 units across 6 cities, she said, and a very comfortable extended stay suite in Houston that I keep out of habit and mild psychological paralysis about what stopping will mean. 42 units, and you've never built yourself something. It didn't seem, she paused. The professional explanation was right there, the one about return on primary residences, the one about capital deployment. Rational. The return on a primary residence as an investment. Queena. She stopped. That's not what I asked, he said, gently, without apology. She looked at the table, then back at him. No, I never built myself something. Until now. Until now. A breath. 36 years old, and I finally decided to act like I'm worth the same investment I give everything else. He didn't make a sound. He didn't offer a platitude or a filler. He looked at her with an expression that had gravity in it. Not pity, not the patronizing warmth of someone performing empathy at the appropriate moment, something that said I understand this specific weight, because he had apparently been carrying a version of it himself. I'm 41, he said, and I have been optimizing for expansion for so long that I nearly bought another commercial property in Miami before it occurred to me, in the elevator of the building I was buying, mid-deal, that I have not slept in the same bed for more than 2 consecutive weeks in 3 years, and that this had somehow become normal to me, a thing I had optimized around rather than examined. She considered him. The specific quality of what he had just said, the elevator admission. Is that why you're actually out here? Or is this a portfolio decision you're telling yourself is personal? He blinked. A flash of something moved across his face. Respect, she thought, or the recognition that she had drawn a very accurate bead on something he'd rather not examine under this quality of light. That's a precise question, he said. I ask precise questions. It's both, he said slowly. Or it started as both. The land pencils out. I ran the numbers. It's sound. A pause. But when I stood on that land this morning, he shook his head. No, it stopped being portfolio. She nodded, because she knew that exact moment. She had felt it herself, at this same fence post, with the hawk turning and the creek light and the smell of cedar that had nothing to do with return on investment. They stayed for 2 more hours. The coffee shop filled up around them, and neither of them noticed. The conversation moved through the technical and the personal with the ease of 2 people who had learned to do both well and were relieved to find someone who could follow them through both registers. Later, walking to their respective cars in the small town square, the October sun sharp and angled in the way that makes everything look like a painting that is being considered, he stopped and turned to face her. He had 5 or 6 inches on her, and he occupied space without imposing it, without the quality some tall men had of filling a room past their edges. I'm glad the land is adjacent, he said. She looked up at him. Me too. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The briefest touch, barely a touch at all. The gesture of a man who had asked a question with his hand instead of his voice. A question more than a statement. She didn't move back. Dinner, he said. Tonight. You're very declarative. I've been very cautious for a long time, he said. I'm deciding to stop. She could feel the warm ghost of his fingertips against her cheekbone long after his hand had dropped. The October air moved between them. 7 o'clock, she said. You pick the place. He smiled. That full, sudden thing that rearranged his face. Or something you love, he said. I want to see what you think of yourself when you're feeling good. She raised an eyebrow. That's the most interesting dress code I've ever received. He laughed, stepped back, gave her space, precisely the right amount. Tonight, Queena. She watched him walk to his truck. She sat in her rental car for a full minute before she started the engine. She held the card with his handwritten number in her fingers and felt the strange, particular sensation of something beginning. 12 acres, she thought again. And apparently a neighbor. She was smiling when she pulled out of the parking lot. Part 2, Building. Chapter 3, 7 o'clock. She wore a deep, rust-colored wrap dress that she had bought in Marrakesh 3 years ago from a woman in the Medina whose name she had never learned and had thought about ever since. A woman who had placed the fabric across Queena's palm, without a word, and waited, certain, and had been right. She had packed it in every bag since. Taken it out, looked at it, put it back. Kept it for a reason she couldn't quite name. The reason being, she understood now, that she had been waiting for a night that deserved it. This was the night. The restaurant was small, family-owned, back half of the main street. The kind of place that exists in Texas towns, as though by some providential accident. A cook who had trained somewhere serious and come home with skills the town hadn't asked for and was quietly grateful to have. A back patio strung with lights the color of late afternoon. Tables close enough for intimacy without imposing it. A menu written in chalk on a board that changed by what was good that week. He was standing at the entrance when her car pulled up. She watched from inside the car for a moment. The way he was standing, facing out toward the parking area, unhurried, his hands in his pockets, comfortable with waiting. He was in a dark jacket over a white shirt open at the collar, and he had dressed with the same quality she had come to recognize in him. Simply, carefully, as a man who knew what suited him and didn't need more than that. She watched his face move through something when she got out of the car. Not performance, registration. Something arriving behind his eyes before his composure could get in front of it. His gaze moved over her dress, her face, the way she walked toward him, and what she read in it was specific and warm and entirely genuine. She liked it unreasonably much. You found a reason, he said when she reached him. For the dress? I've had it for years. I'm glad it made it to tonight. He held the door and let her go first, his hand resting briefly at the small of her back. Warm, present, entirely appropriate. And she felt it in a radius much larger than the small square of contact it occupied. Felt it in her shoulders, and along her spine, and somewhere below her sternum, where things register before she names them. They were taken to a table on the patio. The sky out here did something it simply couldn't do in cities. Went fully, uncompromisingly dark between the stars. The kind of dark that requires true distance from human light. The kind that makes you understand the scale of things. The stars were not decorative. They were structural. You grew up in Texas? He asked. Houston. Left for Atlanta at 23 because I had a scholarship to graduate school and a need to be somewhere no one knew me yet. She broke a piece of the bread that had appeared without ordering. You? Baltimore. Then Howard for undergrad. Then 6 months of not knowing what I was doing. Then New York. He smiled. I have been firmly in the Northeast my entire adult life. My mother has opinions about this. What kind of opinions? The kind that arrive in care packages. Hot sauce, because she is convinced New York doesn't understand seasoning. Socks, which she has been sending since I was in college and shows no signs of stopping. Last month, there was a small jar of her tomato preserves wrapped in newspaper like it was something precious. Is it? He looked at her with a sudden warmth. It really is. She laughed. She's not wrong about the seasoning. She is devastatingly right. I just can't tell her that or she will take it as an invitation. His voice shifted quality when he talked about his mother. It lost some of the composed precision and picked up something looser, warmer, the voice of a person who has been loved and knows it. She filed it away. A man who lit up about his family was a man who knew how to love things. Tell me about the security firm, she said. Started it at 32 with my college roommate Marcus and 2 government contracts that we had absolutely no business winning. Marcus had defense contacts through his father, a retired general whose name opened certain doors. I had the technical background and the ability to stay awake for 36 hours when required. He said it without fanfare, information delivered accurately, and without decoration. Now we have 400 employees across 12 cities. Cybersecurity primarily, physical security consulting, some private protective services for high net worth clients. You started with government contracts. How? She asked the real question, the one behind the surface question. The how did you actually build the thing question, not the what is the thing question. She watched him register the distinction. We were both willing to work the kind of hours that make you question your sanity for long enough that the margins started making sense. And we had the extremely useful ability to learn from people who had done it before without our pride getting in the way. A pause. My mentor at Howard used to say that pride is just fear wearing a suit. I believed him. The Honda Accord years, she said. He pointed at her, pleased. Exactly. Mine was a sublet in a bad part of a good neighborhood and ramen in a rotation of 4 variations, which I know sounds like a cliche, but I can tell you it is also a true story. Which variation got old first? Chicken, he said immediately. She raised her glass. Shrimp. They ate. The food was good. Real Texas brisket, slow-cooked past the point of any reasonable argument, and vegetables from somewhere nearby, and a wine that appeared without her asking that she didn't expect, but should have. He asked about her portfolio and listened to the actual answers, followed up on specifics, connected things she had said an hour ago to things she was saying now in the way of someone who treats a conversation as something cumulative rather than sequential. He had the listening skills of someone who had built something that required understanding people before deploying them. Your father? She asked, because she was reading the same architecture she always read in people she wanted to understand, and she wanted to understand the floor plan of him. Present, he said, and there was something in the single word, a note of gratitude, of luck recognized and not taken for granted. 38 years married to my mother. Retired fire captain. He is the reason I understand the difference between what you build and what it means. She turned her wine glass by the stem. That's a good reason. He used to say, Donte, a house is wood and stone. A home is the decision you make about who gets to be in it. He said it with the cadence of someone quoting something they have carried a long time, worn smooth from handling. I didn't understand it when he said it. I was 19 and I thought I understood most things, which is its own form of stupidity. Quiet fell between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that happens when something true has been said aloud and deserves a moment before the conversation moves past it. That's why you're building, she said. I'm building because I'm finally ready to make the decision. He met her eyes directly. I've been waiting to be sure. Sure of what? He held her gaze. That I know what I want to put in it. She held his gaze for a breath. 2. 3. The patio lights made everything golden, and the stars above the Texas dark were doing their serious work overhead. That's a lot to put on a house, she said. I'm a lot, he said simply. I've stopped pretending otherwise. She laughed. Low, genuine. The real laugh she had been letting out more since yesterday morning than she had in months. What does that mean? It means I want the house and the person and the mornings and the arguments and the growth and the mess. He leaned forward slightly. The candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes. I am very clear about the fact that I am too old and too tired of my own company to want anything partial. She looked at him across the table, at the composed certainty in his face and the warmth moving steadily beneath it. She thought about the dress she had been saving and the land she had finally bought and the fact that she was 36 years old and had spent 15 years ensuring that every other thing in her life was tended and invested in and growing. I have a history of keeping myself very busy, she said, so that I don't have to think too carefully about the partial thing. I know, he said. I recognized it immediately. She raised an eyebrow. That's presumptuous. Is it inaccurate? A beat. No. He nodded, just once. I'm not a project, she said, and I'm not looking to be rescued from myself. Good. His tone was easy, unmoved, a man stating facts rather than negotiating position. I'm not interested in either of those things. I'm interested in a person who has done the work and is ready. He held her gaze. The question I've been sitting with since yesterday morning is whether you are. She considered him across the candlelight. This man who had stood at his fence line the same way she'd stood at hers, looking out at something that meant more than land value, finally reaching for something that wasn't strategy. I'm ready, she said quietly. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His hand was warm and large and held hers with the same quality as everything else, without hesitation, without performance, with a completeness of presence that she was beginning to understand was simply who he was. They stayed until the restaurant was otherwise empty. They were the last people on the patio, the lights still strung above them, the Texas dark still doing its extraordinary thing overhead. They walked back through the town square after, the night cool and quiet, their footsteps on old brick. At her car, he turned her gently by the elbow and kissed her, not tentative, not a question pretending to be a statement, something deliberate and warm and entirely his. She kissed him back with the same quality of decision, her hand moving to his lapel, holding the fabric, keeping herself in contact. When they separated, he pressed his forehead to hers for a moment. Just that. Just the weight of his forehead against hers, and both of them breathing. Tomorrow, he said, I want to walk your land with you. And I'll walk yours with you, she said. He smiled against her temple. Good night, Queena. Good night, Donte. She drove back to her hotel with her hand resting on her own chest, feeling the steadiness of her own heartbeat, as though it had changed key overnight, and she was only now learning the new one. Part 3. Foundation. Chapter 4. What they built together. The house began as a conversation and became a blueprint and became a thing that was happening in the world, in the actual ground of 24 Texas acres, and the fact of it, its physical reality, its permanence, did something to both of them that they discussed only obliquely, the way you describe the shape of a thing you can feel but can't quite see. She called her architect, Maya, who had cried, and described the adjacency, the combined acreage, the creek that would now run through the center of something rather than the back third of a smaller something. Maya said, very carefully, Queena, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you the plan changed. Darling. A pause in which Queena could hear Maya choosing her words. The plan grew. 24 acres. One house. A covered back porch that ran the full length, facing the water. 20-foot ceilings in the main living space. For bedrooms, because Queena had asked for 4 and Donte said that sounded right to him too, and neither of them said the rest of the sentence out loud yet. but they both heard it clearly, like music playing in another room. They spent 4 months in the long-distance negotiation that people call dating when they are being imprecise about what they're actually doing, which is deciding. Flights between Houston and New York, the particular rhythm of airports becoming familiar, the security lines and the gate changes, and the specific exhaustion of belonging to no time zone. Weekend trips to the land, walking the site together, watching the progress, arguing cheerfully about windows and materials and the kitchen island, which Queena wanted in white oak and Donte wanted in dark stone, and which became, ultimately, both. A hybrid that their contractor initially resisted and ultimately admitted looked better than either original choice would have alone. He flew to Houston on a Thursday in January with no announced agenda. She opened her hotel suite door, and he stood in the hallway with a garment bag over one shoulder and a bottle of wine in his hand, and an expression that had made a decision about something and had not made it lightly and was not apologizing for having made it. "I have a meeting in Dallas Monday morning," he said, "and I'd like to spend the time between here and there with you." She stepped back from the door. He came in the way he always did, without hesitation, without filling the space with commentary, just a man arriving somewhere he intended to be. He set the garment bag over the chair and opened the wine with the easy propriety of someone who had spent enough time in this suite to have earned a comfortable relationship with its geography. She leaned against the counter and watched him. He knew where the glasses were. He knew which drawer she kept the corkscrew in because she had not known herself, and he had found it on his second visit and made a small mental note she hadn't seen him make. "I'm selling the New York condo," he said, his back to her, pouring. She was quiet. He turned and offered her a glass. "I already have temporary corporate housing in the Dallas office. I'll use that when I need to be in the region. The firm has flexible working arrangements for leadership." "Donte, the house breaks ground in April." He took a drink. His eyes were steady and warm and completely made up, the face of a man who had examined a thing from every available angle and reached a conclusion he trusted. "I see no reason to keep paying for square footage I don't intend to occupy when I know where I'm going." She set her glass down. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, close, tilting her face up to his the way she never found difficult. She had always been comfortable with the fact of him being taller, had found it oddly restful, the specific geometry of being beside someone whose size felt like shelter rather than imposition. She put one hand flat on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric. "You're sure?" she said. "I've been sure since October when you said mine and looked out at the water like you were saying something to yourself you'd needed to say for years." He held her gaze. "I was sure before we had coffee. I was just being patient about the rest of it." She breathed. "I'm not a partial person, Queena. I told you that. You told me that." He set his glass down and covered her hand with his, warm and steady against her palm. "I'm here," he said. "That's all I'm saying. I'm here." She rose on her toes and kissed him. Chapter 5, the first night they stayed. He had been waiting to understand what he wanted before he reached for it. This was the pattern she had come to recognize in him. The deliberateness that was not caution born from fear, but precision born from self-knowledge. He had taken the time to know himself, and now he acted from that knowledge without apology. She had been waiting for someone who would reach without reservation, without the hedging and the half-commitments, and the "I'm not sure I'm ready for that" specifically that she had collected across years of people who were impressive and capable in every domain except the one that required them to want something completely and say so. The suite was dim, the city below them going on with its reasonable Friday evening business, traffic and restaurant noise, and someone's music floating up from a lower floor. And they had made dinner from delivery and had played the card game she always lost with a particular focused energy because she was going to beat him eventually and the universe owed her that. And they had talked for 3 hours about his mother's visit to the land site. She had cried, standing at the future site of the kitchen, and had said, "Donte, I see it" 3 times in a row until he had to hug her to stop the loop. And about Queena's mother's phone call, when Queena told her, she had also cried, and then listed 17 concerns in rapid succession, as Queena's mother did with anything she loved, before ending with "Baby, I am so happy for you," which was the sentence that mattered. At some point the talking gave way to quiet, and the quiet gave way to him. He kissed her the way he did everything. Unhurried, deliberate, a man who had decided and was following through without apology, without performance, without any of the self-consciousness that had made other encounters in her life feel like negotiations rather than arrivals. She felt the shift in the room's temperature like a climate change, something atmospheric, the air between them becoming something different than it had been. She was never a woman uncertain about her own want, but she was sometimes a woman who kept it professionally managed, deployed with the same measured caution she applied to leveraged investments, kept inside particular parameters. She let the parameters go. She felt them release like something she had been holding with one hand while keeping the other hand free, finally putting both hands on the thing. She pulled him closer by the collar of his shirt and felt him smile against her mouth. Warm, undefended, pleased. "There you are," he murmured. "I've been here," she said. Not like this. He wasn't wrong. They moved through the suite with a kind of easy navigation that surprised her, like 2 people who had been in the same space long enough to understand its architecture, who had learned each other's patterns and rhythms in the smaller ways, and were now learning them in this way. He knew where the light switch was. She knew how he moved, that he needed a moment to remove his watch and set it precisely on the nightstand, that he did it without thinking, the gesture of a man settling in for real, for the night, for as long as it takes. She stood at the foot of the bed and watched him. He came to her and unbelted the wrap of her dress with the particular attention of someone who understood that unwrapping something carefully was itself a form of respect, That the care taken with the thing communicated what you thought the thing was worth. The fabric fell open, fell away, pulled. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing diplomatic in it, just real, full, human appreciation, the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he had been going and is glad he made the trip. Queena. Just her name. Just that, as a complete sentence. She reached up and started on his shirt buttons with steady fingers. She had 4 senses fully occupied, and the 5th, sound, was producing something she hadn't heard from herself in long enough that it surprised her when it arrived. A sound from the unmanaged part of her, the part that lived below the professional efficiency and the composed surface, the part she had been giving inadequate visiting rights for far too long. It came out low and unguarded, a sound that named where she was without language. He noticed. He always noticed. There, he said, low, against the curve of her neck, his breath warm on her skin. That's where I want you. She believed him. She could feel him meaning it. He was methodical in the best possible way. Methodical in the sense that he paid attention to the data, that he filed what worked and returned to it, that he had an unembarrassed thoroughness that was its own form of intimacy. He had said early in their relationship, with the directness she had come to find essential in him, that his own satisfaction was inextricably bound to hers, that this was not performance or strategy, just the truth of how he was built. She had believed it when he said it. She believed it completely now. She said his name in a way that contained no composure and no professional management and nothing of the careful distance she had deployed as protection for 15 years. He heard it. He answered it with every part of himself. She felt the specific gravity of his attention, focused, absolute. A man who was present with the intensity of someone who had chosen to be here and chose it again with each passing moment. The city went on below them. Neither of them knew it. Then the world compressed into a single point, brilliant and complete, and she made a sound that came from somewhere below language and held on to him through it. He was with her every moment of it. After, she lay in the crook of his arm, her cheek against his chest, listening to his heartbeat come back down to its ordinary rhythm. He had one hand in her hair, moving through it with the same unhurried quality of everything he did, as though he had no agenda except to be where he was. You okay? He asked, his voice back to its normal register, warm, present, the voice she was making a life with. More than, she said. She could feel him smile against the top of her head. Later, much later, she was at the window with his shirt over her shoulders, and he was behind her, his arms around her, both of them watching the city without seeing it, seeing instead the shapes of their own private futures overlaid on the lit grid below. Tell me something you want, he said. His voice was rough and soft at once, the voice of someone who has come through something and landed. She turned her face toward him. In general? From this. From us. He pressed his mouth to the side of her neck, unhurried, warm. I'll trade you. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously, with the full weight of herself. I want someone who knows me and stays, she said. He tightened his arms around her. Your turn to ask, he said. What do you want? To build something with you. A pause. The house and the rest of it. Another pause. All of it. She turned in his arms and looked at him. He looked back. Okay, she said. It was, she thought, the best investment decision she had ever made. Part 4, Rooms. Chapter 6, Patience. 6 months in. The house was framed. They had driven out together to walk the skeleton of what they were building. The wooden bones of walls not yet walls, the suggestion of rooms, the space defined by structure that had not yet been filled. It was the best time to see a house, Queena thought. Before it was finished, when you could still see its grammar, the logic of it, the decisions made visible in the beams and posts and the gaps between. Queena stood where the bedroom would be and looked out at the open sky where the window would go, the view already framing itself, cedar and limestone, and the silver flash of water in the lower third of the property, the creek doing its year-round thing below the frame of what would eventually be glass. Donte stood behind her. Come here, he said. It wasn't a question. It was the specific quality of command that she had discovered, with genuine, pleased surprise, that she responded to in a way that had precedent in fantasy and no precedent in her actual life with anyone. He had a register of voice, low, certain, absolutely steady. A register he used rarely enough that when it appeared it operated on her like a specific frequency, like a sound that moved something it was calibrated to move. She turned from the window and went to him. He had brought soft braided rope, the kind she had found in his travel bag 3 months ago, and raised an eyebrow at. And he had raised an eyebrow back with an expression that said, when you want to know about this, ask me, and I will tell you everything. She had asked. He had told her. The conversation had been extraordinarily direct, and she had listened with the same careful attention she brought to things that mattered. I need you to trust that I'll take care of you, he had said. And you need to trust that I mean that completely. If anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately. If anything feels right, tell me that too. She had agreed to both. Now he wound the rope around her wrists with extraordinary care, checking the tension with his fingers, testing where it sat against the bone of her wrist, asking her to flex and tell him what she felt. Too much, he asked. No. She said it quickly. Then again, with intention, no. It's good. He looked at her face the way he always looked at her face when something mattered. Like her expression was information he was actively tracking, updating in real time. She looked back with the directness she brought to everything she cared about. She was nervous in a way that was excellent. She was trusting him in a way that was, she recognized with some clarity, genuinely new. Not dangerous new. Important new. Hands up, he said. She raised them. He looped the rope to one of the exposed beam brackets with a slip knot. She noted the slip, not specifically, the fact that a single pull would release it, that he had built the out into the arrangement before anything else. That care made something in her chest ease open. He stepped back and looked at her. She was standing in the skeleton of their bedroom, October light coming through where the window would be, her wrists up, the rope present but not pulling, the afternoon cool on her skin. She felt exposed and certain at once. The exposure not as vulnerability, but as arrival, the feeling of finally putting something down. Beautiful, he said. The word was plain and unflourished and went directly into her chest like it had been aimed there. He came close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without contact, the heat of him a presence in itself. He did not touch her. He stood there and looked at her and let the anticipation build in the space between them until she could feel it on her skin like weather. He was a patient man. He had been demonstrating this for 6 months, in the way he listened and returned to things she'd said, in the way he gave her time to think before he expected an answer, in the way he held the space for silence rather than filling it. Now he was demonstrating it here, where patience operated differently, where it was not a virtue but a form of intensity, where the waiting was itself a thing he was doing to her. Ask me, he said. Donte, ask me. Low, certain, the specific register. She pulled in a breath, let it out slowly, and then she let go of the composure, let it fall the way the dress had fallen on their first night. And what was underneath was something she had spent 15 years keeping carefully managed, this specific version of herself that she had shown almost no one. Please, she said. He smiled, slow, warm, absolutely pleased, a man who had been waiting patiently for a thing and was glad it had arrived. He closed the distance between them. What followed was methodical in the best sense, deliberate, attentive, a man moving through the work of her with genuine focus. His hands were warm and certain and unhurried. He touched her with the quality of someone who had paid close attention and was applying what he knew. And what he knew was specific because he had asked specific questions and listened to the specific answers and had remembered all of it. He had opinions about what he wanted from this. He had said so directly, months ago, with the directness that was his native register. He wanted her. Specifically, completely. He wanted access and presence and her full permission, extended and maintained. He wanted to know when she was close and when she was far and what was moving her and what she needed. He wanted all of it because he was genuinely interested in all of it. She had extended the permission. Completely. She said his name in a way that contained nothing composed and nothing managed and nothing she'd ever deployed as protection. The sound of it went out over the unfinished frame of the house, over the wooden bones of the bedroom and the open spaces where walls would be, and into the October sky. The world compressed to a single point. She held the beam above her and let it take her weight and felt him there, steady, present, the whole time. He was with her every moment of it. After, he released the knot with one pull. She had known he would. She had trusted he would, and caught her hands as they came down and brought them to his mouth. He pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist, to the faint pink of the rope's impression. She leaned her forehead on his chest. He held her without speaking, one hand on her hair, one at the small of her back, just holding. You okay? He asked eventually, his voice back to its normal register. More than, she said. And then, thank you. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for trusting me. She could feel him smile against her hair. Chapter 7. Her terms. 3 weeks later. The house now had drywall, another layer of itself, another step toward the thing it was becoming. She had thought about the next part since that afternoon in the skeleton bedroom, had thought about it with the specific, deliberate focus she brought to things she wanted and intended to have. She had spoken to him about it and he had listened with complete attention, his elbows on the table, his eyes on her face, and had said, whatever you want, Queena, in whatever shape you want it, and he had meant it entirely. She believed him. She knew him well enough now. She met him at the door of the Dallas apartment, temporary corporate housing, functional and neutral, belonging to no one in the particular way of corporate spaces, and stepped back to let him in, and then said, before he had set his bag down, I have some thoughts about tonight. He set his bag down, slowly. His eyes moved over her. She was in a silk robe, nothing else, and she had chosen it deliberately, the same way she chose everything deliberately. He was already paying attention. Talk. Sit down. He sat on the edge of the bed, his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man genuinely willing to receive what was coming. She had always loved that about him, that he received without flinching, without immediately formulating a response, without making the receiving about himself. She stood in front of him. She had the height advantage from this position, standing while he sat, and she was aware of it and comfortable with it. She reached out and lifted his chin with 2 fingers, tilting his face up. He let her. I want to take care of you, she said. I want to be very clear about what I mean by that. He held her gaze. I'm listening. I want you to tell me what you want, she said. Specifically, and I'm going to give it to you on my terms. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him sitting with the distinction, the specific shape of it, the power dynamic of the request, what she was and was not giving away. That's a meaningful distinction. I know. She kept her fingers beneath his chin, light but present. So tell me. He told her. He used direct language, the way he always did, the way that had stopped surprising her and started feeling like something she couldn't live without. The clarity of a man who said the actual thing, who did not imply or suggest or leave the shape of his want to be inferred. What he said was specific and warm and real and entirely about her, about what he wanted from her, what he needed, what he had been thinking about. She listened to all of it. You are very good at asking for what you want, she said. I had to learn it. It wasn't natural. His eyes were steady on hers. She could feel the shift in the room, both of them aware of what was happening, the usual architecture between them in a different configuration, both choosing it consciously. I spent a long time expecting people to know what I needed without telling them. It took me a long time to understand that was a form of self-protection dressed as self-sufficiency. I know, she said. I can tell it was learned. Which means you decided to change it. I decided to. She kissed him, with her hand still beneath his jaw, with intention, with the particular quality of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and has chosen to do it completely. She felt him exhale like something releasing, like something he'd been holding let go. She understood suddenly that this was also care, that there was a version of him that had needed to be in control because he had not known how to put it down safely, and she was a person who was offering to hold it while he did. And she understood it because she was the same way, had spent years in control of every variable because she had not trusted that anyone else would hold anything for her. They were, in this as in so much else, mirrors of each other. Lie back, she said. He did. She was not a woman who doubted herself in any domain she had prepared for. She had prepared. She gave him what he'd asked for with the specific, focused attention she brought to everything she cared about, which meant with all of herself, nothing withheld, no professional management, no useful distance. These were her terms, and her terms were complete presence. She was not performing. She was doing it because she wanted to, because his want and her want had found the same shape. He made sounds she had not heard from him, the unguarded register, the sounds below composure, and she found she wanted every one of them. He said her name the way she had heard herself say his, 3 weeks ago in the skeleton of their bedroom, with nothing held back. She found she liked that sound considerably. She found she wanted to hear it again and again, that it was a sound she intended to collect. Afterward, she lay beside him, her head on his chest, his hand moving slowly through her hair. Queena, he said to the ceiling. I love you. She picked her head up and looked at him. He was looking at the ceiling, and then he turned and looked at her, completely undefended, completely present, a man who had said a true thing and was standing by it. I know we haven't, he started. I love you too, she said. He pulled her back to his chest. She could hear his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt, steady and present, the specific rhythm she was learning. Okay, he said. Very quiet. Yeah, she said. Okay. Chapter 8, Weekend. 9 months in. The exterior of the house was finished and the interior was in its final stages. Paint chosen and applied, flooring laid. The kitchen island that was both white oak and dark stone standing exactly as Queena had imagined it when she had first argued for the hybrid against the contractor's gentle skepticism. They drove out on a Friday after Donte's last call and her last email, the city dissolving behind them the same way it always did on these drives, the particular loosening that happened when the density fell away and the sky expanded. By the time they turned off the county road onto their access road, the tension in her shoulders had found its way out of her body, replaced by something that had no name that was not simply here. She had been noticing something over the past month, a shift in the quality of her desire that she had been sitting with without rushing to name it. In the beginning it had been the new thing urgency, the heat of discovery, learning him. Then it had become the ease and depth of someone known, the particular pleasure of someone whose patterns you had memorized. Now it was both at once, the ease and the heat together, the way comfortable and hungry were not opposites, were not even adjacent, were in fact the same thing when the person was right. She thought about this driving through the dark. The house received them. That was how it felt, like a thing that had been waiting, that recognized them. The lights came on in succession as they moved through it, the floors warm under their feet, the smell of fresh paint and new wood, and the particular smell of cedar that drifted in from outside through the screening. They didn't talk much. They moved through the house the way they moved through it now, separately and together, each with their own circuit, checking the familiar things, the things that were theirs. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter. He opened the back door and stood for a moment listening to the creak. Later they were in the bed that was now their bed, in the room that was now their room, and she had turned toward him in the dark and found him already turned toward her. Hi, he said. Hi. Good week. Better now. He made a sound in his chest, low, satisfied, and reached for her. What happened next was neither the urgency of discovery nor the sweetness of the familiar, but something that contained both, that moved between them like a conversation they had been having for months, full of references only they understood, full of the particular shorthand of two people who know each other's languages. She knew what he wanted before he said it. He knew where she was before she told him. They had learned each other's rhythms the way musicians learn a piece, first consciously, then into the body, until it lived there without effort. She rose over him in the darkness of the room that was theirs, and he put his hands on her waist and held her weight, and she felt, in that position, in that specific dark, the full scope of what she had built, the land and the house, and this person and this life. And it moved through her like the creek moved through the property, constant, sustaining, hers. Afterward they lay in the open window's cross breeze, the creek audible from where they were, the night doing its extraordinary Texas thing. I keep thinking about the porch furniture, she said, in the way that things surface after intimacy, the thoughts that have been waiting underneath for space. The chairs. The chairs. She turned to look at the ceiling. I want them to be the right chairs. Not beautiful in the catalog chairs. Chairs that are actually the right shape for sitting in for a long time. We can go look at them this weekend. I want to sit in every one before we decide. Obviously, he said, and she could hear the smile in it. She laughed, soft, and turned toward him. He pulled her against his side. The creek ran on. Chapter 9, The Creek. The house would be finished in 60 days. They had spent the night before at the build site, in the house that was almost theirs, air mattress, sleeping bags, the porch screen in, but no furniture yet. Watching the creek in the dark and falling asleep to the sound of it, the first time either of them had fallen asleep here, in their actual house, and it felt like a rehearsal for something. In the morning, with the light coming in from every direction the way it does in a house not yet curtained, the world reduced to its essential light, she was already awake. He found her on the porch. She was standing at the porch railing in his sweatshirt and not much else, coffee in both hands, watching the creek catch the early light. The morning was doing what Texas mornings did, an excess of gold, a quality of light that seemed to come from inside things rather than outside them, the cedar and limestone lit from within. He came up behind her, warm and unhurried, still half asleep, and put his hands on her waist the way he always did, the automatic placement of someone who had learned where his hands wanted to be when she was in front of him. "Morning," he said, his voice the deep, rough version, the one from the first minutes of wakefulness. She leaned back into him. "It sounds different in the morning." He listened. The creek ran on, lower than a sound, more a quality of the air, something the silence was made of. The birds were doing their extraordinary collective announcement of the day. "It does," he said. She put one of her coffees in his hand without looking, the gesture of someone who has memorized another person's presence. He took it without commenting, which was how they had been with each other for months. The easy exchange, the no announcement necessary of two people who have learned each other so thoroughly that accommodation had become automatic. "I've been standing here thinking," she said, about the fact that I built this." She meant everything, the land, the house, the morning, the cup of coffee in his hand and hers. "We built this. We built this," he confirmed. She turned to face him. She was in his sweatshirt in the morning light, and she did not bother with composure. There was nothing to protect anymore. That was the great gift of this. She had finally made a place where she could put it all down, where being unguarded was not exposure, but simply the truth of where she was. She pressed one hand to his chest, the habit of her hands, the specific flat-palmed gesture she made when she wanted to feel his heartbeat, to confirm him. "I want you," she said. Just that. Her terms, as always, direct, complete, with nothing managed about it. He smiled down at her with his full face, the sudden, rearranging smile she had loved since October, since a fence line and a raised hand, and the specific quality of a person arriving at something. He took the coffee cup from her and set it on the railing. He took his own cup and set it beside hers. "You have me," he said. There was no rope, no elaborate arrangement. There was the porch of the house they had built, the morning light coming in from every direction, the creek sound below them, and two people who had put down what they'd been carrying for years and picked up each other instead. He turned her gently toward the railing and stood behind her, his hands moving under the sweatshirt, warm against her skin, the morning cool and the warmth of him making their own weather between them. The creek was visible below, silver and constant, running over its limestone bed, unchanged by any of this and witnessed by all of it. She held the railing, and he held her, and the morning held all of it. She was herself. He was himself. Nothing was performed. This was what it felt like to be in a place that was hers, with a person who was hers, with no other version of it anywhere that she was maintaining or protecting or keeping ready as an exit. The creek ran on. Afterward, they sat on the porch steps, his arm around her, her coffee retrieved, the morning coming fully in and warming everything by degrees. "I want to put a chair here," she said, meaning the left end of the porch, the place where the view of the water was unobstructed and also somehow private, a corner of the porch that felt like it was for a single person's private use of the morning. "One chair," he said. "Two chairs," she corrected. "Obviously." He kissed the top of her head. "Obviously," he agreed. Part 5. What Grows. Chapter 10. The Thing She Didn't Expect. She had been told, at 29, by a doctor she still thought about with a complicated feeling, competent, kind, delivering the information with the care of someone who understood that facts can be accurate and still feel like loss. That pregnancy would likely not be possible without significant intervention, and perhaps not even then. Endometriosis, charted and documented. Multiple conversations over multiple years. Multiple quiet recalibrations of what her life would contain and not contain. The slow private grief of a thing crossed off a list you hadn't made yet. She had made peace with it. That was the truth. She had done the work of acceptance, had sat with it, had mourned it in the way she mourned things, which was privately and completely, and then moved forward. She was good at forward. She had stopped thinking about it. She did not expect, therefore, at 37 years old, 2 months after moving into a house she had built for herself, 8 months into the most fully inhabited life she had ever inhabited, to be sitting on the floor of the master bathroom in the house on 24 Texas acres with a positive pregnancy test in her hand. She sat there for a long time. The tile was cool through her pajamas. The light in the bathroom was the early morning light, pale and noncommittal. The test sat in her hand and said what it said without qualification. She could hear Donte downstairs. He was in the kitchen. She could tell by the sound, by the familiar acoustic signature of him inhabiting their space. The coffee maker. The particular creak of the third floorboard from the left in front of the sink. The sound of a cabinet opening and closing, deliberate, but not loud. The sound of someone who has learned the rhythms of a space and moves within them. She had come to find this, the sound of him in their house, to be the best sound she knew. Better than the creek. Better than anything. She came down the stairs. He turned from the coffee maker and immediately, because he was a man who paid attention, whose first instinct was always to read the room, to read the person, to update his understanding without waiting to be told. His face shifted. Something changed behind his eyes before she said a word. What's wrong? She held up the test. He was still for a full 3 seconds. She counted them. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took the test from her hand and looked at it, and looked at her, and she watched his face do something she had never seen on it. Something that had no composed quality, no managed surface, nothing of the steady professional competence she had been watching for 8 months. Something that was simply a man receiving news that broke open a room he had not known he was keeping locked. Queena. His voice was unsteady. She had not heard him unsteady. The doctor said. I know what the doctor said. He reached out and took her face in his hands, the two-handed cradle, which he reserved for moments that required his full attention. What do you say? She looked at him, at his face, which was doing something complex and beautiful and entirely genuine. Surprise and wonder, and the specific quality of a man who has been building towards something without knowing all of its dimensions and has suddenly seen the full thing. She thought about 37 years. The Honda Accord. 42 units across 6 cities. The rust-colored dress she had been saving for a reason she couldn't name. The 12 acres that had become 24. The creak she could hear from the kitchen. The chair. The second chair. The obvious. I say I don't know how, she said. But I think something changed. Something changed, he agreed. And she could hear everything he meant by it. Not just the medical fact, but everything that had preceded it. The entire architecture of the thing they had built. The land and the house and the mornings and the decision they had each made and remade every day. She put her hands over his on her face. Are you? She started. Yes, he said. Before she could finish, before she had even fully formed the shape of the question. Whatever shape you mean that, yes. She breathed. He pulled her in and held her against his chest, the full body hold, his arms around her completely, his chin on the top of her head, the specific warmth she had come to rely on without embarrassment, without any of the old calculation about what it meant to rely on someone. She could feel him breathing. She could hear the creak through the kitchen window. We're going to be okay, he said into her hair. I know, she said. And she did. Completely, and without reservation. She knew. Epilogue, 24 acres. Later, a year later, a lifetime later, in the reasonable and insufficient math of time, she had finally stopped applying to the things that mattered. She would try to articulate what had happened. The doctor would call it unexplained, which is the word doctors use when the body does something they cannot chart, when the data argues against an outcome that has nonetheless occurred. The endometriosis was still present, documented, and real. And yet, she would have her own explanation. It was not medical, and she would not try to make it so. It was simply this. She had finally given herself somewhere to land. And something in her, some part that had been waiting, rationing itself, keeping reserves for a day that kept not arriving, had believed her. The porch ran the full length of the house. The creak was audible from every room. There were 2 chairs at the left end, facing the water, and between them a small table. The right table, not the beautiful catalog table, the one they had sat in at the furniture store for 20 minutes apiece before agreeing, where the coffee cups lived in the mornings. The mornings, which were long now and unhurried, which were the mornings she had been saving herself for without knowing it. Donte was a man who had wanted something completely and had stopped being cautious about wanting it. He was a man who said the actual thing and meant it and returned to it without being asked. He was the father his father had made room for him to become. Queena was a woman who had finally stopped investing in everything except herself, who had learned, at 36, standing at a fence post with the smell of cedar and the sound of water and a hawk turning slow circles overhead, that the first place worth building was a place to come home to. Together, they were the most rational decision either of them had ever made. 2 people who had been ready for a long time, who had arrived, in the same field on the same October morning, at the same conclusion. There is a room in every person for the things you stop being afraid to want. They had built themselves a house in that room, and they had built it together. 24 acres. 1 house. 2 people who had come looking for land and found something else entirely. And in the spring, when the creek ran high and the porch was warm and the Texas sky did its extravagant evening thing, painting itself in colors that had no names in the practical vocabulary either of them had spent their lives speaking, there would be a 3rd chair. They would buy it before they needed it. They already knew. The end.